Welcome back to another episode of Hypertrophy Perspectives. I'm your host, Enzo. Today I'm joined with a frequent guest, Coach Aaron.
I'm Coach Aaron. Hello.
What do you know about hypergamy, Coach Aaron?
Hypergamy is something that I've been very familiar with my entire life.
Interesting. How so?
Yes. Well, ever since I started lifting, actually, I shouldn't say my whole life, but ever since I started lifting,
Right.
I think it has to do with the fact that your muscles get bigger and then you start getting funnier and funnier, something like that.
We're able to finally get an episode out to you guys about visualization. We lost about 2 hours of footage, didn't we, Coach?
Yeah, but really, what we should have done is just upload the transcript and then just have them visualize the podcast. That would have been dope. But here we are re-recording this shit.
Unfortunately, yeah. Hopefully after you guys will be able to visualize the next one when I don't upload for the next few months.
Oh, is that foreshadowing?
We'll see. Stay tuned for future uploads.
Okay.
All right. So we're diving into some papers today. But before we do that, let's give them a taste of what visualization really means. So, Aaron,
okay,
how would you define visualization in the context of strength training?
So first of all, when we're talking about visualization in general, like when we're using it to have any type of performance outcome, physical performance outcome, we're using it in the same way that it's ubiquitously used in sports, right? The idea of visualization is not something that any sport coach or athlete or researcher at this point is really going to disagree with. I mean, we've had this as a common practice since forever. Everyone's always done it instinctively. Coaches have always preached it, and we've had an abundance of research about it, really for a long time, longer than you would think, about how it works to increase performance. So, as far as how visualization works for strength training, right? When we do a set of what seems like a simple exercise that requires not that much coordination, you could say, a lot of people have the tendency to just go into the exercise and try to figure it out halfway through. And so what I see a lot of the times is people will do an exercise that you can tell doesn't quite feel correct for their target muscle. And those are the ones that they end up going like really trying to get those grindy reps on. And I see why they're doing it. I understand. I relate. I put myself in their shoes. I know why I used to do that. And it's whenever I couldn't feel a certain muscle work, I thought the answer was just push it harder and then I'll start to feel something eventually. Maybe it's just like stubborn or something, right? But really what that comes down to is a lack of being able to understand in your head first before you do the action, like what muscles actually are doing the action and therefore what line of path the exercise is going to follow. Because even if you do a single joint isolation exercise, let's say if it's on a cable or something, or the machine isn't perfectly fixed, even if the machine is perfectly fixed, your joints don't just work in like a completely fixed pattern. Like, for example, I could have a preacher curl machine and I could have several different like strategies in order to get the weight up, even though it's just using a machine, right? So when we're talking about visualization, we're really talking about mind-muscle connection in a sense, but ahead of time. I hope that makes sense to everybody.
Absolutely. And another thing I would like to point out is that this is an issue that we see amongst a lot of science-based lifters in our community with the explosive concentrics. Everybody's trying to just fire out of the hole with as much power as possible, thinking there's a gun to your head, there's a train about to fall on top of you. As we go deeper into this research, the findings may show a little bit of a different story as far as it comes to maximum recruitment. If we wanted to get the most out of applying tension to the target muscle, maybe having a more controlled approach will be beneficial. Stay tuned to find out. Another thing I wanted to point out is, this reminds me a lot when we talk about visualization of cueing and form. And I know I mentioned this when we last recorded. When we're cueing for an exercise or thinking about how to perform an exercise, all we're really doing is collecting different visualization points and putting them together to create this mosaic of different frames of a movement, and then our brain takes them all together and tries to find an average of those movements, and that becomes what the task that we perform is. So visualization is a key aspect, whether we understand it or not, whether we're aware of it and we label it or not, to how we perform every single exercise.
Right. I think you can explore a lot more different joint angles and positions in your imagination than you ever can in practical reality. And so to your point, Enzo, if you're mapping your mental mapping of your body and your anatomy and what's going on in an exercise is dependent on having a wide array of available strategies, understanding them all, and then being able to pick an average of them depending on what the task you want to be. If it depends on having that wide array of experience, then part of that experience should involve frequent visualization, because that's how you make small adjustments in a little bit of time. If I want to make an adjustment to my exercise in the gym and I already did a set to failure, what that costs me is like 4 minutes of rest if it's like a big compound exercise, or maybe like a minute of rest or less if it's a small isolation exercise, and then followed by another intense set, or followed by multiple less intense sets that all take time, and then I need to recover from those as well. When I could spend that time going through the positions in my head beforehand, and then once I do the exercise, I relate it back to that mental model that I've put in my own head through the visualization process.
I want you to go deeper into the art of being the observer, and I want you to talk a little bit more about how that may contrast than being how they may contrast being the performer, and in what situations we can maybe get a taste of both, and how that could be beneficial. Because I remember you talking about this in the previous episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what Enzo means when he's talking about the art of being the observer, what we're like, think about it like a coach and the athlete or the client or whatever, right? While the athlete is doing the exercise or the movement or whatever, the athlete is aware of themselves in the sense that they are focused on what to do, how to execute. In other words, their performance. The coach, their bandwidth is focused on what does their performance look like against this standard of what it should look like, I guess. And people will tend to be in athlete mode or tend to be in coach mode, but it's very hard to be both at the same time and kind of see yourself while you're doing something. So visualization is important because basically while you're the athlete actually doing the movement, if you're doing something at a very high effort, then all of your mental energy is directed towards output, right? Similarly, if you're a coach, there's disadvantages there too. You're so separated from the athlete. You can't be inside of their body. You can't really know what they're feeling or what they're experiencing. You're relying on secondhand feedback from them. That means your signal is blurred too. But as the person who's doing the exercise and watching yourself do it, there's a lot more powerful and immediate neural connections that can be made because the feedback is so immediate. Meaning, if I am able to do something wrong, immediately feel and perceive that I did that thing wrong, and then know how to correct it because I can kind of see myself from a third person point of view, I'm coaching myself, and all of those things that would take longer to practice and longer to learn become really simple and easy and just matters of small connections. The issue is that obviously if you're doing something at a high effort, you can't be both of those at the same time. And so visualization is extremely helpful because you turn yourself into the observer and the person doing it at the same time. Now, this framework that I have for seeing visualization like this, it sounds like I pulled it out of my ass, and that's because I did. But then when I read these papers, the more I realize that these papers are also supporting this type of interpretation of what visualization
Seems like
is,
these papers have been up your ass too, Coach Aaron.
They've been far up my ass, and we're going to pull them out, and they're nice and stinky and ready for us to stick our noses into. All right, I got the paper open in front of me. I pretty much remember like the gist of it.
Okay. So do you want to read the I'll read the intro or you?
Whichever.
I'm going to read it.
Whichever. Okay.
All right. Introduction. The simulation theory. The possibility to experimentally access to cognitive or mental states characterized by absence of overt behavior represents a new avenue for neuroscience. In the field of human motor cognition, it is only recently that it was realized that actions involve a covert stage. This covert stage is a representation of the future, which includes the goal of the action, the means to reach it, and its consequences on the organism and the external world. Covert and overt stages thus represent a continuum.
Pause. So, first of all, let's introduce the paper because I forgot to do that. The paper, by the way, is Neural Simulation of Action, a Unifying Mechanism for Motor Cognition by Marc Générard in the Institut des... No, I'm not going to fucking do the French shit. It's the Institute of Science.
I'll do it for you.
Science, so it's, yeah.
Marc Générard, from where? Where is this? Where do you want? What don't you want to read?
Right underneath the title, right underneath his name.
Oh, Institut des Sciences Cognitives at 67 Boulevard Pinel.
No way.
In 69, 67, double, wow, triple.
No. Okay, so this paper was received in November 28th of 2000. Now, it's important to understand, right, that this is not the first paper that is being done on this subject. In fact, when you read this paper, it functions more as like a literature review with a slight contribution of like, hey, so yeah, this is true in it. But the literature up to this point on how human beings like accomplish tasks that we plan has been extensive. At this point in time, in the year 2000, we already know which parts of the brain are responsible for planning. That's very important because when we know which parts of the brain are responsible for which types of executive functions, we can place sensors around those brain areas and see what's lighting up when you ask somebody to imagine to do a task, right? And so we would expect, for example, like the parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex to be involved because those are involved in future planning things. There's all sorts of things that are involved in future planning things. There's also things involved in literally like imagining things. Like there's parts of the brains that is literally dedicated to being able to conjure an image in your mind and manipulate it, things like that. So let's continue with that, Enzo. Go ahead, keep reading.
Covert and overt stages thus represent a continuum, such that every overtly executed action implies the existence of a covert stage, whereas a covert action does not necessarily turns out into an overt action. Wait, is that a typo in the paper?
French. Remember, it's being translated.
True. Whereas a covert action does not necessarily turn out into an overt action. This simulation theory to be developed in this paper postulates that covert actions are in fact actions, except for the fact that they are not executed. The theory therefore predicts a similarity in neural terms between the state where an action is simulated and the state of execution.
Remember, you gotta go to the next. Yeah.
And the state of execution of that action. What's very interesting to me about this, though, is that it seems like the way it's described is that even the simulation or the imagination of an event is treated as if was an action. It's almost like it's happening upon us.
Yeah. So what we're going to, not to spoil, everything in the paper, right? Obviously, but what we're going to find out in the paper is that doing an action doesn't just consist of one part of the brain. It consists of a coalition of efforts of different parts of the brain, and that covert actions will share things in common with overt actions. Like the parts of the brain that actually end up sending signals to your nervous system to do something will end up lighting up. So it's kind of like these two pathways that are converging onto a point.
Absolutely. Let me continue reading.
Mm-hmm.
The term S states will be used throughout to designate those mental states which involve an action content and where an action content or content.
Content.
Okay. Those mental states which involve an action content and where brain activity can be shown to simulate that observed during the same executed action.
So when they say action content, they're just describing what I was basically saying. When you do an action, your brain, parts of your brain that are responsible for executive functioning light up and send signals to your like through your nervous system, to your muscles, to your heart, to your endocrine system, all sorts of things that would happen in response to you actually doing that action. And so when they talk about action content, they're talking about that information that finally makes it to the part of your brain that is sending the signals through the nervous system to the different parts of your body. That makes sense?
Definitely.
Okay.
The next section is covert actions or neurally simulated actions. The idea that certain cognitive states correspond to simulated actions is by no means new. These states now include a wealth of situations which correspond to covert actions. Some of them are accompanied by conscious experience, some are not. In spite of these differences, they all bear the same relationship to action, both at the behavioral and neural levels. The main features of some of these states are outlined below. Now, the next is introduction, correct?
The
next is imagined actions. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start reading now. So behavioral findings have accumulated in the past 10 years showing that imagined actions retain the same temporal characteristics as the corresponding real action when it comes to execution. So this is important, right? When we talk about covert actions, sharing characteristics in common with overt reactions, we need some way to measure that, right? So time is a really good measurement for that. That gives us something that we can quantify. A quantitative aspect of an action is how long it takes to complete. And we can deduce from how long it takes an action to complete, how long it also took the brain to process the task and send the signals through the nervous system to complete that action. We can then match that up against the time that it takes for the brain to mentally do a covert action, which again, we can measure through the length of brain signals. And we can see if those times line up. And if they do, that is another drop in the bucket of confirmation that we have that the covert and overt actions are very simple or similar, I should say. So again, he's citing a paper from 1989, DeCidi et al. 1989. Okay, I haven't read that paper, but like I said, they're talking about the past 10 years. They're having behavioral findings that are showing these temporal characteristics. So similarly, temporal regularities which are observed in executed actions are retained in their covert counterparts. As an example, mental reciprocal tapping on targets of varying size follows the same constraints as tapping on the same targets. Okay, so temporal regularities. What does that mean? It just means that the time is showing some sort of regularity or rule to it. I can't find my mouse. There we go. The time is showing some sort of regularity or rule to it, meaning it's being governed by something. Okay. So when they talk about mental reciprocal tapping following the same constraints as actual tapping on the same targets, what they're talking about this is in a mental sense. Like, for example, if I give you a bunch of targets to actually tap, they're like a screen, and the targets pop up like this, and they're at a certain speed, and you're tapping them, right? Let's say we get to your fastest like speed of being able to tap them. Okay, so that's going to have a maximum, right? Oh, it would be not necessarily logical, but maybe intuitive or natural to think that, well, that's how long it takes for this, like my hand to physically move around. But like, if it was my brain, I could just do it instantly. Like if I didn't have to actually tap it, I would just be able to do it instantly. That's not true. There's actually a ceiling also, obviously, to the speed with which your brain can mentally complete those tasks too. And it ends up being very similar to the speed at which you're actually doing it when you account for the physical need for your hand to move around. Okay. So this temporal similarity becomes even more obvious in non-conscious operations, where the subject is simply requested to make an estimate about the feasibility of an action. For example, to determine the feasibility of grasping an object placed at different orientations, the time to give the response is a function of the object's orientation. suggesting that the subject must mentally move his arm in appropriate position before the response can be given. So let's say I have this object sitting right here, and I need to go and grab it. Okay, and you're telling me, Enzo, imagine how long. Imagine grabbing that object. Okay, and how long it would take to do that, or what was the word? Not how long it would take, but how feasible would it be to do that? All right. Basically, if you ask me that, I'll say it's very feasible, almost immediately. Because if you said, "Hey, grab that thing in front of you," boom, easy. No
Right.
rotation required. No object permanence required. No
Mhm.
ability to plan for the future really required. An animal could do that, in other words, right? But let's say I put it over here and it's out of sight, and you tell me to go, how possible would it be to go grab your hat right now?
You fumble
First,
for
I
a
have to
second.
remember where the hat is. I stumble for a second. First, I have to remember where the hat is. Then I have to picture it in my brain, especially if you're telling me to grab without looking at it, to picture it in my brain. And then I have to estimate where it is, and I have to estimate the distance between that and my hand. And then I can go grab. So it would take me a little while to respond. And that response time might be about 8 seconds.
And
Okay.
compare that to you grabbing your phone off of the nightstand in the morning, even if you don't see it. Since you have that memory of it always being there, you'll be much more instinctive when you wake up in the morning, immediately, almost in a fluid
It's
motion,
ingrained.
grabbing your phone off the nightstand without having to look.
It's ingrained. It's ingrained. Right. So it's almost telling something that we should already know, right? It's common sense, right? If you don't know where something is, or if something's more difficult to imagine, like planning, it's going to take longer for you to be able to judge the feasibility of the outcome. And that's indicating to the authors that they're going through the steps of actually orientating it in their mind, because more steps would mean more time, right? More steps would mean more time. First, I have to reach out, then I have to turn.
So I
So
remember
all of these different things. Uh-huh.
I remember as we were reading this on the Lost episode, I mentioned at this very point that it seems like the way the paper was going at this level, it suggested to me that the body almost the nervous system almost created like a copy of a potential action command. And it set it in motion for it to be like almost in queue to be released. And there must have been some type of mechanism inhibiting it, like preventing
Yes.
the action from actually actualizing into a full movement.
So
We'll see how
what
that
we're
holds
talking
up as we
about.
go on.
Mhm. Yep. What we're talking about, just to give some context before we actually get to that point, there is a copy made of every single, basically, like, impulse we send in our brain, and that copy is called, Enzo, I'm sure you know this, the corollary discharge. Okay,
Mhm.
corollary discharge, however you want to pronounce it. Okay, so we have a corollary discharge. What that means is that our brain, every time we have an impulse, like even when I'm speaking right now, every single time I choose to say something, my brain is not only sending the signal to the required parts of my body to do that function, but it's also sending a copy of that signal descending through my entire nervous system to start processes that don't even directly have to do with the talking. To just make that concrete, imagine I was nervous right now. If I was nervous right now, um, thinking of the words would produce a copy that would send a signal through my nervous system to maybe be maybe be stuttering more, or to maybe second guess what I'm saying more, um, to have to think longer about what I'm saying, or to maybe speak faster out of anxiety even. All of these little things are driven by hormonal changes, and the endocrine system is not needed to speak, right? The endocrine system does not, you don't need that to be activated or stimulated in a specific manner in order to make words come out of your mouth. So why does it do that? It's because the brain has the corollary discharge, which it then uses to interpret what the actual action you're doing is going to mean to you. Another way that corollary discharge idea takes effect is physically. Let's say that you're unracking a barbell. You're sending a copy of that signal to through your nervous system that, hey, we're unracking this barbell, and your whole body's going. You're gonna see that your whole body braces. How does your body know how to brace? It's not because of the signal that got sent to the muscles to take the bar out. It's because of the corollary discharge copy that descended through your entire nervous system. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. And what Enzo is saying is that when you do a covert action, there is that corollary discharge that is similar to what happens when you're doing an overt action. So if I can imagine bending my elbow and it has a corollary discharge that is similar to when I actually bend my elbow,
Right.
what's stopping me from just actually bending my elbow?
Right, but it would always go through. It will always be filtered by your perspective in space and time, which is the key part as well to recognize. Like the corollary discharge will always be filtered by your perspective in space and time.
Right. So that's another important point, right? So Enzo, have you ever like picked up a grocery bag expecting it to be like really heavy and then it just fucking flies up? Yeah. So
Yes.
that's because, right, your body was sent a corollary discharge before you went and picked it up. It said this is going to be heavy as shit, and you just unconsciously started to activate more muscle mass, and then it turned out it's light as shit. But that didn't matter because your brain thought it was heavy. So what it resulted in the thing hitting the ceiling.
When you pick a weight that's too light, you accidentally, don't change it when you go onto a machine.
So, indeed, the time to make this estimate is closely similar to the time taken to actually reach and grasp an object placed at the same orientation. Not surprisingly, motor imagery is one of the first situations for which it was specifically proposed that it should involve in the subject's motor brain neural mechanisms similar to those operating during the real action. Just putting a nice little bow on what we just said. That sentence summarizes what we've just said, but it's only a summary because we explained it, and it would have been confusing otherwise. So let's continue. Action
I'll take over action observation if you'd like.
Yeah.
I got you, bro. Another category of covert actions can be elicited by observation of actions performed by other individuals, as if the observer would use the implicit strategy of putting himself in the shoes of the agent. At present, this concept and its consequences on behavior is taken as equivalent to mind reading, the ability for normal people to understand and predict the behavior of their conspecifics. One of the explanations proposed for mind reading is that it represents an attempt to replicate and simulate the mental activity of the other agent. In other words, the observed action would activate in the observer's brain the same mechanisms that would be activated were that action intended or imagined by the observer. So this is very interesting as well. This goes to what we were saying. Our brain, the corollary discharge, makes almost a simulation of another agent's behavior based on our own information we've collected on our own movements, as that's the only stimulus we have.
Yep. So there's countless examples we can think of, huh? Like, have you ever braced for impact when you're in like watching an intense movie scene and the car's about to crash? Have you braced, like unconsciously? We all have, right? Whenever you're seeing something, scary that the main character is going through in the horror movie and your butthole starts to pucker, we've all gone through that. And here's another one, right? Hypochondriacs. That's a great example of what's going on there. I think that's what was kind of misunderstood for a long time about hypochondriacs, is that a lot of people think that they're faking it, and that's not really true in the physiological sense. What's going on is that their brain, for whatever reason, is wired to make a copy of whatever they're associating in their head, whatever they hear about at that time. Their brain is sending corollary discharge down their nervous system, and it causes symptoms. It's been proven to cause symptoms. I mean, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, hypochondriacs are a real thing where just thinking about it can cause symptoms. It's crazy how the nervous system works. It can upregulate endocrine processes. It can upregulate immune system processes. All of these different things that might cause reactions. But yeah, the point is that the corollary discharge is something that can be very closely, so closely representative of you actually doing the action that it triggers. Like that's what was so interesting to me. And so, like, did you see the wording that they used there? When they're talking, like they're relating it to mind reading, it activates, right? That's the word they use. Me seeing you do that, it activates a mechanism in my brain that has a ripple effect, because my brain doesn't just do that action in isolation. It associates it with all of these different things, which I think is that's just so interesting to me. Because if I'm seeing something and it's close enough to literally activate something in my nervous system, that's very similar to lock and key theory in biology. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like it's just like it seems that the body always kind of works in this way where it's like it's very remarkably precise and nuanced and complicated. But at the same time, if you just find the right key, you can pretty much open any lock in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's
It's not like a
fascinating as hell.
fingerprint system where it's all where each key is unique. And but that's like a really important statement what they just implied, right? That me seeing you do something through a specific mechanism of creating a corollary discharge is how the monkey see, monkey do phenomenon works. It's how people can be visual learners. It's not just like, oh, I see you do something and then I try to imitate it blindly. It's like I saw you do something and I created a copy of that that taught me before I tried to teach myself. There's like a pre-learning to it. And that they're taking this from a paper in 1998 by Galeese and Goldman. That basically they directly measured that activation in the brain when somebody would see somebody else do something. Well, before we get into like the competing things, I just wanted to point out like how interesting it is that like they're using such strong language here. Like you don't see this type of language being used in academic papers very often, where they describe something as like mind reading, and it seems so mystical like that. And then also talking about when you see something, it like activates a part of your brain, and it activates mechanisms that are similar to actually doing the overt action. Like it sounds like like it really sounds like magic.
Yeah, honestly, it kind of confuses me while reading it. I've never heard any academic paper refer to anything as mind reading, and it almost seems as if they're speaking in. I mean, they obviously are using some form of hyperbole, but you don't see hyperbole to this extent used in literature. So I wonder why they chose to do that.
It seems Galilean, right? It seems like back when science and religion were really mixed. Do you know what I mean? Like that, like where mysticism was almost like accepted as an explanation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you're
I
probably all
almost
for
like
that.
that.
I was about to
Yeah,
say you're probably
because
all for that.
I think sometimes it can be more precise, even if more ambiguous at the same time. Does that make sense? Because
Definitely.
at least when you're being ambiguous, you can contain the truth in it, and that truth would be very precise. But if you are more precise in your language, you might be more precise in what you're saying. You might be excluding some part of the precise truth. Does that make sense?
No, I think it definitely does make a lot of sense. And I don't see that perspective a lot in this specific field that we're in. And
Right.
I wonder what the true, because they, as an author does with his novel, or a filmmaker does with their film, oftentimes when word choices like that are used, or certain frames or imagery is used, it's meant to evoke a very specific response. So I think the use of mind reading is a very poignant little word bite from what they're talking about, because mind
Right.
reading has very
It seems
deep
almost poetic.
implications. Yeah, but
Right.
it's
It
also
seems
very
almost
deep
poetic,
implications.
right? Yeah, like as if it's like a metaphor for something,
But
or
it's
as if
almost
it's
like the
like a symbol of
body.
something.
It's almost like the mind reading. Sorry, it's almost like mind reading doesn't
That's all I was gonna
necessarily
say.
have to be accurate for it to be read as mind reading, because to the body, it is a read of the situation. So according to our impulse, we're going to behave impulsively based on how we've read the situation, regardless of how the situation truly is. So it's almost a point to how convicted our nervous system is when it makes these judgments of our surroundings.
Right. Not only a point of how convicted, but also a point of how much of it is like literally like you're reading a map, like you're downloading a map from somebody else's brain and then reading it. It's conviction, and
Mm.
it's also just like this confidence in the precision of that mental map. And what I think is interesting is what you said earlier. I was actually going to just make that same point. You said it in a really good way about um about like that, like it's like it doesn't matter if literal mind reading in the sense of like I'm seeing your thoughts like they're just like appearing. It's like it might as well be to the body. It might as well be. And so I think that the word mind reading is used here. So it's so interesting to me because while it sounds
In the same way the body
fantastical,
uses it.
right, I don't think they mean it in a fantastical way. I think they mean it more as a placeholder than anything. Like that's just the best word that we have to describe this phenomenon of what happens when I see you do something, and just the sight of that produces a corollary discharge as if you just spoke a language to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost as if, once again, that word choice, it speaks exactly to what the body does itself. It becomes convicted and just puts a placeholder there with a lack of full stimulus and full context. We're never going to have the full context in our bodies because we are limited to our bodies and we're forced into this material form. Right. We will only see it from one perspective, and we can only posit what the outside world will be from the stimulus we receive. And that's very important to recognize. I know we keep hammering that in, but
right. No, but it's important to hammer in because what we're basically doing is hammering in the point that that our bodies are sensory machines and our brains are computers. So our bodies give us feedback to the nervous system and our brain computes it. Now, it would not be far-fetched to say if I run a computer program that I make on one computer, right? I make a computer program and then I run it on another computer. That's a form of the second computer reading the thoughts of the first one. It can take that whatever file you put it and it can deconstruct it from there based off of the outcome it's given. So it's the same thing with people. Your brain goes, oh, there's like a rough consistency to which inputs lead to which actions in nature. And the more complicated the action gets, the more convoluted it can get and the more errors you're prone to. But Enzo, if I see you do this with your elbow, my brain knows exactly what does that. And it knows how to make that happen. So I'm reading through my computer what your brain is thinking by running your program.
It's interesting how we'll only see it through our lens, though, as far as our anthropometry is concerned, because I always imagine, like, as a tall person with the length of femurs that I have and the length tibias that I have, when I imagine myself squatting, if I were to imagine myself squatting as a 5'4" person, how would I do it? What would my form be? It wouldn't be how it is now. You know what I mean? So I would probably imagine it. I would imagine myself squatting the same way that I squat now. I wouldn't, imagine myself to have a different hip angle or knee angle when I'm coming down.
Well, and that's an interesting point because something that Ollie was talking about when we were talking to him was the fact that, yeah, like sometimes people, especially when they're going through the process of like a growth spurt, like younger athletes, you have to kind of reteach them movement patterns because when they're envisioning themselves doing something in their head, their limb proportions are all different from what it actually is in reality. Like their brain isn't actually keeping up with how their body's growing. But yeah, once that sets in stone, once you get accustomed to your anthropometry, it's like your body will take all of these other like programs that you're running on your computer with your anthropometry and your specs, and it will compress it and it will manipulate it almost automatically to fit your own specs. It's like if I'm running a different operating system than you, or I have different like my pixels are different, right? And like the shape of my screen's different. I can still take your video and run it on mine and still portray it in my own way. The really cool thing about the body is that it doesn't tend to portray it in the sense of like, let's say, Enzo, you're on a landscape and I'm on a portrait. What my body isn't going to do is it's not going to take your landscape thing and put it on the portrait like this and have a bunch of black empty space. What it's going to do is it's going to distort the image to fill the screen. And it's going to choose how it does that based off of my previous experiences, how I've done it in the past. And I think that's, it can be considered an inaccuracy or a bug, but I think it's a huge shining feature of the brain that it's able to roughly, like it's able to roughly fill the whole area that it's working with. And it doesn't have to be so rigid and precise with its calculations.
Right, because it truly only has to understand its own anthropometry.
Right. right? And everything else, it can just kind of fit into that. But you know, that does come with its downsides, right? A lot of people will see someone do something and think, I mean, that's where we get the idea of, oh, he made that look easy. And you don't know why he made that look easy until you like look closer and you realize, oh, yeah, like Clarence Kennedy, he can high bar squat ass to grass 700 pounds because he's literally just completely built to squat. Like he's got this long torso and these short little legs. So if I tried to go and squat like that, I would end up tipping over, right? So when I try to visualize myself squatting like Clarence Kennedy, my my brain has to go through so many different layers of changing the angles to match my own angles, and it's going to come out and produce something that looks very different, even though I'm conceptually doing the same things, if that makes sense. I'm still trying to get the bar balanced over the middle of my foot. I'm trying to get an optimal balance between like quad and hip extensors, all those things, but it's going to look slightly different because my form is different. But we are kind of getting derailed on as far as that goes. But I think we should get next into the point that you wanted to talk about, Enzo, which is that if there's a corollary discharge being sent, where's it going? What's happening to it? Why isn't it resulting in action?
Right. Is there some type of inhibitory mechanism?
Right. Right. Okay. So if I'm not mistaken, Enzo, last time we were reading this, it answered the question in this paper.
Motor system. Activation of the motor system during S states is a prerequisite for the simulation theory. This is what gives S states their action content. fMRI studies unambiguously demonstrate that pixels activated during contraction of a group of muscles are also activated during imagery of a movement involving the same muscles. Poro et al. Showed that pixels activated during both motor performance and motor imagery represent a large fraction of the whole population of pixels activated during motor performance. Primary motor cortex activation reported during motor imagery amounts about 30% of the level observed during execution. It may not be found in all subjects. Similarly, during action observation, magnetoencephalography reveals a significant activation at the level of precentral motor cortex. Yeah, all right. So I wanted to explain a couple things. First of all, I want to explain to you guys what the pixels mean. So that's like fMRI language. So when you use the fMRI, it scans the brain in tiny volumetric units, and they're called pixels sometimes informally. A pixel is basically a tiny brain region showing increased blood flow or activity. And what's interesting about this paragraph is that they found that when somebody actually moves a muscle and imagines moving that muscle, some of the same brain regions activate, and a great decent amount too. Another interesting part, primary motor cortex activation reported during motor imagery amounts about 30% of the level observed during execution. That has wild implications. That means about 30% of motor cortex activation is being used when you're just thinking about doing a movement, when you're just imagining doing the movement.
Yes. So, okay, it's so interesting. Like, I feel like I'm just going to be saying like, oh, this is interesting for a billion times today, but I really don't care because that's so interesting, Enzo. The fact that there's 30% overlap between an overt action and a covert action. There's 30% overlap. Not only says a lot about the covert action, you know, how much of an overt action is just inherently part of thinking about something, but that says an awful lot about how much of the planning system is used in any sort of action. Even not like a very like consciously long thought out action. There's going to be a large amount of the planning parts of your brain that need to light up in order for you to do something. What that's implying to me is that visualization isn't something that is really optional. So like when we talk about the importance of it, it's not something where you can even choose to disregard
part of the package.
When you are doing something, you're visualizing it. You are. That's how there's so much overlap from the amount of brain activity that comes with visualizing something that is inherent in the process of doing anything.
So and you couldn't even say it's the first step. It's not even a sequential thing. It's literally it's simultaneous. As you're doing an action, you're visualizing yourself doing an action. That's the key part. that you made the distinction.
That is the key part. That is the key part. Yeah, because the timelines, they line up, right? It's not like, oh, I do this step and it takes a certain amount of time, and I do this step and it takes a certain amount of time. It's like, no, you're doing the steps here at the same time as you're doing it here. The corollary discharge is going boom, 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 boom. It's fast. It's incredibly efficient. I'm just blown away by how elegant the brain is, and the way that its functions work together. It almost reminds me of the body itself too, like the way that muscles synergize in order to produce movement involuntarily, and how muscles that you wouldn't think have anything to do with certain movements are constantly involved. It's the same thing in the brain. Like, there's so many parts that need to work together and overlap in order for any function to occur. So the idea that taking one part of that, because if you're just doing the action, right, Enzo, you might be getting 30% of what you could be stimulating, like in that visualization field, right? So that might be good. That might all be cool, right? You might get just growth here, right? But how much growth could you get? Imagine if you took this already big surface area and exponentially increased it, took this big surface area, increased it, and then by doing that, you increase the surface area of the middle. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
So it says primary motor cortex activation reported during motor imagery amounts about 30% of the level observed during execution. You read that part, right? Did you also notice that part after where it says it may not be found in all subjects? They cite Girardin et al. 2000.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, so I haven't read that paper either, so we might go into that paper at a later time, maybe a different podcast episode. But my suspicion, Enzo, as to why it is not observed in all subjects is because of what we've consistently observed in neurology and psychology, where not everybody has a mind's eye. Not everybody has a mind's eye. My fault. Go ahead.
That can explain a lot of athletic phenoms for sure.
Right.
It's like somebody like Michael Jordan must have a different system, a different level to his system, and we were making the example of Allen Iverson in the previous episode. It almost seems like when athletic people are in the zone, time slows down for them. Could it be that their nervous system is more efficient at these simulations, and multiple simulations can be happening at the same time, and they could truly be processing more? And because of that extra processing, that processing must hold some sort of memory to an extent. And maybe that's why it feels like time slows down in these intense athletic situations.
Yeah, so when you take information, right, and you crunch it down, that has a time implication to it inherently. What this paper is implying, again, so cool, and it's not even just this paper. We found all this stuff in the literature review, right, where they're referencing other papers. But what this area of research is telling us is that literally, like, your brain stores information as bits of not only visual data but also time data. Time is part of the data. So if you're taking that data and you're compressing it through the ability of having it like encoded already, you're also literally compressing the time, right? So there's almost like a theme or like a motif of Einstein's relativity going on here, where by warping the dimensions of the space of the information, you are also warping the time that it takes. It's one fabric. So if that is the case, it's not that these actions take less long to complete. I mean, they do to an extent. Obviously, the better athlete, the more coordinated one, will be able to complete the moves more efficiently and everything. But even for an athlete that is doing it at the same speed, if it's not as encoded into their memory, like let's say one athlete's dribbling at 50%, the other athlete's dribbling at 100%, but they're going the same speed. The athlete that's dribbling at 100% is going to perceive it as faster. Time will be literally moving faster for them. Right, because it's literally just that they like their
Have more
brain,
RAM.
by the time the ball has left their right hand, their brain is already 5 steps ahead, and it's as if the ball is in their left hand already, and they're waiting for time to catch up.
They have more
They're
RAM. They have way
waiting for
more
it to
RAM.
catch up. Way more RAM. So when we talk about like, oh, time flew by, that happened so fast for me, that's not a figure of speech. Time literally flew by for you. It literally moved faster for you. It has so many philosophical and just physics implications too.
I
It's so
know.
crazy.
And we could do a whole other episode on that.
I know it's just stunning and dumbfounding. Like I love the way the brain works. Anyways, corticospinal pathway.
Yep.
Okay. If motor cortex is active during S states, its activity should influence the motor neuron level. This point was tested by directly measuring corticospinal excitability using transcranial magnetic stimulation of motor cortex during both observed and imagined arm movements. Motor evoked potentials were found to be increased only in those muscles involved in the covert hand action. Okay, so already this can get confusing because they're talking about a new term, right? Motor evoked potentials. Okay, and they put in parentheses MEPs. So we're going to talk about MEPs as motor evoked potentials. This is not to be confused with motor units recruitment or action potential. These are 3 separate concepts. Motor unit recruitment is the amount of like nerves innervating muscle bundles of muscle fibers that are being activated. Action potential is the signal, or not the signal, I should say, but the change in voltage that allows that reaches a certain threshold that allows the motor unit to be recruited. Okay, that's why we have high, low threshold motor units, right? The voltage must meet that threshold in order for that muscle to activate. That's the action potential, is any voltage that is able to cause that. Okay, a motor evoked potential is an aggregate of all action potentials, like the total, how should we say, I guess, action potential, right? It's in the word, right?
It's like the sound reading
of action potential.
If the action
the sound
potential
reading,
is a person in the crowd, the MEP is the sound of the whole crowd.
Mm-hmm. That's a good analogy for it. So if we're measuring the sound of the whole crowd, what that means is we're measuring something about the common descending drive, essentially. We're talking about all of the things that are being sent from the brain that make their way through the nervous system and end up being detectable as action potentials in the muscle. Okay, so I mean, we should define action potential too, right? Because that's brought up sometimes, but like I feel like no one really defines it, and no one really talks about it that much or what it is. So Enzo, you can go ahead and define it if you like. You probably have a pretty good definition.
So an action potential is pretty simple. It's basically just a rapid electrical spike that neurons use to transmit information. So a neuron at rest is electrically charged. When enough stimulation occurs, the neuron will suddenly fire and electricity will rapidly travel down the axon. That electrical event is the action potential. So it matters because, everything in the nervous system depends on these action potentials: thought, movement, sensation, reflexes, muscle contraction. They are the text message, and without them, no communication happens. If you think about it like a text message, once again, that would be a very good analogy. And the MEP would be like a collection of all of the text messages being sent to you from your provider.
Okay, good. So the reason why I wanted you to define action potential is because I feel like I didn't define it, like the full process of it. I just define what happens at the end that causes the action potential. But it has a specific origin, right? Like it starts in the brain, right? And then it's sent through the spine, and then it ends up with the muscle, right? But it's very important to understand like the process of how the action potential flows from the brain down to the limb, because this is now where we're getting into your point that you brought up earlier, which is if I can send a corollary discharge that ends up as a detectable signal in the muscle, why is the muscle not firing to the point where movement is caused? Right? For that to happen, something has to be not connecting in the system, or something must be inhibited in the system, or some sort of counter force must be installed into the system to fight against that. So where along in that chain of events is it happening? Okay. All right. Accordingly, MEPs were selectively increased in a finger flexor when the subject mentally activated finger flexion, whereas MEPs in the antagonist extensor muscle remained unchanged. Also very important.
Right. Because it seems like coactivation is not factored in to the calculation for these movements, at least at the prime level.
So we're doing a process of elimination, aren't we? Right? We know the process is interrupted somewhere. What we know now is that it does not make it all the way to the point where the muscle would contract enough to produce movement, if not for a sufficient antagonist counterforce. We know that's not an explanation. Okay, so we can cut off that one. That's like the very tail end. That's like if the signal made it all the way and the last resort is, oh, we got to send in the SWAT team to come in and rescue. Like, that's not happening. So we can stop there. And I like how they're going about this too. They're starting at the tail end and kind of going up, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly right, Enzo. I agree with that interpretation. So let's move on. We can't both be wrong, right? And in addition, other types of imagery, e.g. visual, did not affect MEPs in any of the recorded muscles. In addition, other types of imagery, e.g. visual, did not affect MEPs in any of the recorded muscles.
It's a little bit of a generalized sentence at the end. I'm a little confused.
Affect, yeah. When affect, did it mean affect like in relation to the mentally activated one?
Right, I'm not sure.
Oh, no, I understand. What they're saying is that if I'm doing finger flexion while I'm like, I guess, imagining or like there's other types of imagery involved that is not finger flexion, it didn't affect the MEPs.
Okay, I understand.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, which also speaks to the fine-tuning, at least, of this system.
Right. So the generation of motor outflow by the motor system also involves a concomitant activation of the vegetative system. Okay, in other words, the sympathetic system. The sympathetic outflow increases during motor preparation. That's interesting that the French refer to it as the vegetative system. And also, Enzo, I forgot when I was talking about how like interesting the language usage was, I forgot this was a French paper.
Wait, because mind reading must have a translation in French to something interesting.
Yeah. It's probably something that there's no direct literal translation.
I'm looking it up.
That's so sick.
Yeah, there is no direct translation.
That's so tough. Dude, the vegetative system instead of the sympathetic system?
Yeah.
What do you think? Sympathetic vaulted?
I think vegetative is on top right now.
I think vegetative is on top. Okay, so sympathetic outflow increases during motor preparation in anticipation of metabolic changes due to subsequent muscular activity. So this is what I was talking about, for example, the other systems of the body being involved, right? Like the sympathetic nervous system shouldn't have anything to do with what's going on when you just like simply need to flex a muscle to complete a task, but the corollary discharge, right? Otherwise, you would do the thing and then the sympathetic activity would follow. But no, it happens concomitantly.
Right.
During motor preparation, in anticipation.
Yep. The brain does not wait for these movements to happen. They literally prepare the body in advance constantly.
Accordingly, an increase in heart rate has been observed during imagined movements. Mm-hmm. That's so cool. Also something that people should understand as common sense.
With no physical work occurring, obviously, because when we get stressed, think about that.
Because, I mean, these are all the guys that are just, you know, according to you at least, right, having cuck fantasies while they're fighting demons in the gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they know what happens when they start thinking about that, and their heart rate
Their
starts to
their
go up.
yeah, their stomach sinks into the floor.
Literally,
It lowers their
literally,
center
bro.
of gravity. It lowers their center of gravity for the squat. I
That's
think
fire.
that's it's absolutely
That's method.
yeah, no, but this is huge, bro, because it's like it almost means that the body partially treats imagined movement as biologically real for a bit, even if it doesn't
For
actualize.
sure. For sure,
It's
because
enough
it
to begin
has to,
autonomic
right?
preparation. Yeah, of course. Because imagine how
Yeah,
cold we would
because
be if
what
we
would be the
didn't.
alternative? Right? Imagine the alternative, right? Imagine how fucking stupid we would be.
But
Okay,
imagine the
so
breathing rate increasing though, which we're about to get into. I'm gonna let you get to that.
yeah, exactly. The control of respiration also seems to be a part of the package of central commands generated by the motor system at the time of preparation to action. Accordingly, respiration rate is increased during imagination of exercise in proportion to the imagined effort. Enzo, this is why I always tell people to be calm when exercising. Can you imagine exercising already at a certain intensity and then imagining the intensity on top of that?
And then imagining your
Right?
girlfriend with another man smiling and laughing, having fun. On top of that, come on.
We are all thinking about that. We are Charlie Kirk.
We are.
This is also the case during mere observation of a runner on a treadmill. The respiration rate of the observer increases with the speed of the runner.
Bro, proportionally to effort. That's not happening.
By contrast, imagined action and action observation activate more posterior area. No, sorry, I fucking went completely off the rails there. I went right to the other side. Sorry. Basal ganglia is the next part. So before we get into that, let's just finish up everything we're gonna say about this, I guess. But
I don't know, bro. Yeah, before we get into that, let's
oh,
get into the deepest
yeah, no,
implication.
no,
I
I
feel
wanted
like
to no, because I wanted to make a quick revision to something we were talking about earlier. This is
Mhm.
my fault. Um, in the first paragraph of this one, it said when they tested the motor cortex during observed and imagined arm movements, MEPs were found to be increased only in the muscles involved in the covert hand action. So basically, like what I read that at the time is, oh, actually, dude, I didn't even fucking say any of that shit. Never mind. I said that the last. Dude, I'm mixing up my memories. I actually got it right. I didn't mean to fucking make a correction. I was gonna say that I can actually mention this anyways. Okay, so it won't be a correction, but I did want to return to this. That sentence right there, what it's saying is, a lot of people like might read that and mistake it for saying that like only during the covert action did they see the MEPs rise. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that the MEPs rose in both the covert and the overt actions, but uh, it was only in the muscles involved in the covert hand action.
okay, yeah, I
So
understand.
those were the muscles. Yeah, those were the muscles that were found to be increased in, which is really interesting. The covert hand action, not the overt one.
Oh, right. Interesting. Yeah. I think the deepest implication. You're frozen for me? Are you speaking?
No, 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 no. Am I still
I
frozen?
think no. I think the deepest implication from this paragraph to me, it's a little bit philosophical, but it seems like your nervous system doesn't sharply separate imagination, observation, and execution like we think. Like all three are partially sharing the same predictive architecture, and it's like
Yeah.
the body like isn't just responding to reality. Once again, like we've been over a million times, it's responding to a simulated reality, which I mentioned this the last episode. We need to talk to Baudrillard about this. I wonder what he would think.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, he'd be laughing right now. He'd be laughing his ass off. I told you guys. I mean, it's always philosophers sitting on the top of these hills, but that really is a cop out because if you have so many philosophers all disagreeing with each other, one of them is going to get one of the possibilities right. and then science is going to catch up to them. And they just got lucky, that motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is true. That is definitely true.
So basal ganglia. Basal ganglia are found to be activated during imagined actions. There are indications that execution and imagination engage different parts of the striatum. During execution, the putamen, which is part of a purely sensoromotor cortical loop, so I'm not stupid, it literally is cortical loop, is activated. During imagination, activation involves the head of the caudate, which is part of a more cognitive loop. Okay, so this is where we're finally getting into the answers to your question, Enzo, which was how does the body not just do the thing that it thinks it's going to do? So it used the word loop twice. Did you notice? There is a cortical loop, and then there is a cognitive loop. What do you take those two things to mean?
Well, I take the cognitive loop to be the preliminary loop. I don't want to speak in temporal terms, but I would say the one that is prerequisite to the other. I would assume that it happens at the brain level and then goes to the spinal cord. I would assume cortical. I'm not sure why the double cortico. That's actually throwing me off. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't even begin to fucking know.
I'm very confused actually with that.
The more important word to me is sensoromotor, because cortical is something to do with like the brain area. Sensoromotor is the function,
right?
The function, right? That's what we're talking about. So it's a part of a brain
that
it's like it's actually sensing something, and motor implies that it's actually doing something, right? So there is a feedback loop that is involved in doing something, right? So feedback loops are referred to all the time in physiology and psychology, or neurology, I should say, where basically once you enter a feedback loop, you do something, it leads to feedback, which leads to you doing the thing again, which leads to feedback, which leads you to doing the thing again. So, for example, if I were to actually pick up this cup in front of me, as soon as my hand touches the cup and feels that the cup is right there, actually, fuck that. As soon as I actually start to move my hand towards the cup, I am now in a sensory motor feedback loop, where now, because my hand is moving, I know to keep moving it, to keep moving it, to keep moving it, to keep moving it, to keep moving it until I get to the cup. Another loop, right? I need to grasp the cup, and then so all of this is sensory and motor. I do something that has a consequence, and that consequence makes me do something. And then I do something, and that has a consequence. The consequence makes me do something. And it's not consequences I'm imagining; it's consequences that I'm feeling. Okay. A cognitive loop is still a feedback loop. So what that means is that if I think about reaching for the cup, but I don't actually, right? We have two parts of a loop here. We have I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. But what is that not doing it part? What's going on there? Why is it like, so I think about doing it, what's activating to stop me from doing it?
As a sufferer of OCD, this is reminding me a lot of intrusive thoughts.
Yes.
I wonder if that plays a role with this.
That's a feedback loop.
Whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a feedback loop. It's absolutely connected, right? Feedback loops are also known as what's called vicious cycles. Right? You've heard of that. Everyone knows what a vicious cycle is. It's something that upregulates itself. The existence of the thing is a signal to do more of the thing, or to have more of the thing, or to cause more of the thing. So when you're thinking about doing something, but you don't actually do it, what does that mean? It means inherently, just by thinking I want to do it without actually doing it, you're not actually only thinking I'm going to do it. Because if you were only thinking I'm going to do it, you would do it. So when you're thinking about doing something without actually doing it, you're actually thinking about two things at once. You're thinking about doing it while also not thinking.
And you're weighing those options. There's a devil and an angel on our shoulder at all times, physiologically.
Constantly. And that motivation to not do it has to outweigh. In other words, you're producing two discharges. And the one that says don't do it has to win. So what is that discharge? Well, we don't know, like, in really literal terms where we could go like, we could name it something that would be helpful, in my opinion. I think the names, Enzo, for this stuff is kind of like stupid. It doesn't really help us. So I'm just gonna call it what it is, right? Which is we just have mechanisms for that. We have mechanisms that tell us not to do something. We have parts of our brain that tell us not to do something. We just have a lot of different inhibitory mechanisms, some of which are conscious, many of which are unconscious. And that is what closes the loop.
This is making me want to talk, not to bring up another philosopher, but now I want to talk to Nietzsche, because it seems like these signals have a will to power and they're constantly competing with each other to exercise that will to the fullest extent. And the one that makes it is the one that ends up getting actualized into movement.
The stronger electrical signal, the stronger part of the brain wins, right? So we just saw during imagination, activation involves the head of the caudate. That's a different part of the brain than what is involved in execution, right? So like it's almost like
an eternal recurrence.
It's almost like yeah. Well, I don't know what that means.
No, now I'm just throwing buzzwords out there from Nietzsche. Sorry, you continue.
Beautiful. Okay. So I was right to be like, what the fuck? Okay. So cerebellum. You want to take it from there? I've been reading for a while.
I got you. Activation of the cerebellum during covert actions is congruent with that of the corticospinal system, if one considers the close functional linkage of the two systems during motor execution. Indeed, cerebellar activation was clearly found in imagined action in perceptually based motor decisions and during action observation. The involved area includes both the medial and the lateral parts of the cerebellum. However, areas in the ipsilateral cerebellar hemisphere that are activated during execution are much less activated during imagination. During covert hand actions tends to I'm tweaking.
By contrast? Go up to the top.
Contrast, imagined action and action observation activate more posterior areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, just more evidence that they're going over from different papers that there are different parts of the brain that activate when you're imagining something versus when you're actually doing something, in order to explain why thinking about something doesn't just automatically involve result in that action.
All right. Should I read premotor cortex?
Yeah. Can I make a real quick point though, just to like really cement into home what we've been talking about based off of all that? And I think you'll like this this way that I'm putting it, Enzo, is that when we're doing an action, I think a lot of us think of it as a step process of a thought enters our brain, we want to do it, and then there's an executive that signs off on it and goes, okay, do it, and then there's more force added to that, and then that's what allows us to actually do the action. Like we have to continue to like will it along. That doesn't seem to be the case. What it seems to be is that the action is going to naturally follow unless we inhibit it with something. A lot of those inhibitions might be unconscious, but a lot of them are conscious. And to do an action, it's really a matter of removing inhibitions rather than pushing the action forward.
Wow, that's perfect, dude. How'd you know I was going to love that? That's like something I'd say, I feel like, summarizing.
Right. I know. We're same wavelength, bro. It was what was the word? Transmission de what?
Oh, shit. I got to look it up now. Transmission de... Fuck. I'm not looking it up. It's too late. Activation of premotor cortex is one of the most conspicuous findings across all S states. Dissetti et al. Found a large activation of the dorsal and ventral parts of the lateral area 6 during imagined hand movements. This is also true for perceptually based motor decisions and visual presentation of graspable objects. During observation of hand movements, the same areas, principally in the ventral area 6, are activated, with a somatopic organization when actions involving different body parts are observed. Lateral premotor cortex activation during covert actions overlaps with movement execution for what concerns dorsal area 6. Activation of ventral area 6 in the inferior frontal gyrus, however, which is less frequently mentioned during execution. That's very dense, so we're going to have to probably break that apart for people. So this section is basically saying the premotor cortex may be the central hub of action simulation, more than the primary motor cortex in some ways. So it's arguing that, once again, like we've been over, the imagined movement, observing movement, seeing graspable objects, they all strongly recruit premotor regions. So let's go into a little bit deeper what the premotor cortex is. Aaron, do you want to explain that to them, or do you want me to go ahead?
The premotor cortex is something that I think if there's any part of the brain that is like a pop cycle, like it's popular to or mainstream to have knowledge about, I think it's the prefrontal cortex because of the rise of like diagnosis of ADHD.
Premotor.
Premotor cortex, right? Oh, sorry, premotor cortex. My fault. Forget all that fucking shit. You cut that out. The premotor cortex. Let me just make sure that it's the part that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I can explain it real quick if you want. I have it right here.
No, it is the prefrontal. Hang on.
What? No, it's premotor.
Yeah. It's in the frontal lobe though. Sorry, that's okay. That's why I confused it. Okay. No. It's fine. So it's still this is still going to be something that like if you have ADHD, you're going to understand because the premotor cortex is part of the frontal lobe, okay, of the brain. So the frontal lobe of the brain is something that is very sensitive, is a part of the brain that is very sensitive to dopamine and is a very important part of the brain that dopamine needs to get regulated towards in order to stimulate executive function, because the frontal lobe contains in it both the premotor cortex and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in planning, especially long-term planning, and the premotor cortex is involved in the literal like the in the moment planning of an action. So like if I need to go grab that cup, the premotor cortex is going to be the thing that is planning my action in order to grab that cup. If I don't have sufficient stimulation of the premotor cortex, I would be stuck in like a state of I would be catatonic. I wouldn't want to move. So when there's not enough dopamine in the frontal lobe and there's not enough like sufficient stimulation of the frontal lobe, I can't plan anything and I can't do anything.
Right. And this paragraph seems to be saying that across imagery, observation, planning, and action judgments, the premotor cortex is activating constantly. So this is also suggesting that stimulation is fundamentally a premotor process, and covert action may rely more on movement organization than execution. Which is... So let's go into the dorsal premotor cortex and the ventral premotor cortex. They mentioned that a couple of times too. Okay. The dorsal premotor cortex is more associated with movement planning, reaching, spatial guidance, and motor preparation. And the ventral premotor cortex is more associated with grasping, object interaction, mirroring the neuron system, and action observation. So you can even see a split there between the planning and the within the premotor cortex itself. Like there's a...
It's the two parts of the feedback loop that they're talking about, the cortical feedback loop, where one of the you said the ventral. Wait, there's the ventral, and what was the other one you said? Dorsal. The dorsal is the one that's involved in the planning, like the reaching, right? So yes. I do an action, and then I grab the cup, right, and then that triggers the ventral premotor cortex so that I can perceive the cup and then decide how I want to proceed based off of that perception.
Right. But it seems like the ventral is what actually deals with the interaction and touching of the object, while dorsal is purely in anticipation of it. Dorsal is almost constantly getting edged by the ventral.
Yeah. Right. But rarely do people just grab a cup and not have any plans with it. What I suspect is happening is I'm grabbing the cup, and then as soon as I grab the cup, both parts of that. Yes, I'm planning how to interact with the cup at the same time as I'm planning on what to do next with it.
So it's just onto a different job, if anything.
Right. Fascinating. Was there any other parts of the brain it covered that you wanted to clear up for them before we move on?
I don't think so, but I think another crazy finding that we didn't really hammer home is that like even seeing graspable objects activates the premotor cortex. Like just looking at an object that is graspable will activate the premotor cortex. So that means your brain is automatically simulating possible actions when merely viewing objects in space. Seeing a mug handle, a dumbbell, or a doorknob can partially activate grasp-related motor representations. Like perception is already action-oriented, it seems like. Like the brain is seeing in terms of like, what can I do with this? What actions can I perform with all my surroundings?
There's no such thing as a neutral observation. In other words,
we're always constantly,
I'm perceiving something in relation to what I might do with it or how I might interact with it. Wow.
Yeah, that's what I thought was the craziest part of this whole thing. This section.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. That says so much about like how people like interact with each other too and establish relationships, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you probably know what
What'd you say?
by that. That just like has a lot of implications for like how people perceive each other and form relationships and things like that. And like that's a whole rabbit hole I don't want to go down now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's horrifying. Whether we're consciously doing it or not, we're running a lot of simulations constantly on people.
All the time. I don't perceive you as just a thing that's there. I perceive you in relation to how I might interact with you.
Yeah. Dang.
Shit, should we stop
our body's always thinking about like mutilating and making love with one another whenever we're in the same room. That's crazy.
That is crazy. Wow.
It is calculating how to do about it. Like, it's not to get grim. Like if we're in the same room, like my body is calculating how to strangle you, how to suck your dick, all of those things. Like it's calculating how to go about do those things, whether I think about it or not.
Exactly. And I'm trying to think about how to suck your dick. I mean, I'm thinking about trying to suck your dick. I mean, how to I don't fucking know, bro. Let's just suck each other's
You're thinking
dick.
about you're thinking about how to ask too?
I'm thinking about how to ask, bro. I'm nervous. Oh man. Now I'm angry.
All right, let's move on.
And
let's move on. This is getting
commit violence.
Yeah. Do you see anything more interesting in this paragraph, or do you want to move down to the parietal cortex?
Let's move down, man. Let's move down. Yeah.
Wait, are you can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to read it?
Yeah, just read the whole friggin' thing.
Like all the way down
like,
to
don't even pause, just read the whole fucking...
The whole, okay, yeah, bet you can stop me if you have something to say. Parietal areas, caudal and ventral to the primary parietal cortex are consistently activated during S states. Areas in the inferior parietal lobule, that's a fun word, and in the intraparietal sulcus, that's another fun one, are sulcus. Okay. Sulcus are activated during imagined grasping movements, perceptually based decisions and prospective action judgments, action observation, and visual presentation of graspable objects. During execution, the same parietal areas are also largely involved. The area involved during covert hand actions tends to extend more caudally than during overt actions. Posterior parietal cortex may be the site where action representations are stored and or generated. Because it integrates abundant visual and somatosensory information, it appears well suited for encoding the technicalities of the action, like transforming object spatial coordinates from a retinocentric framework into an egocentric framework. Wow, I love the French. Or processing the constraints related to the objects. These aspects are represented in many different estates. Did you want me to stop there or keep going?
No, stop there, because I want to go into retinocentric and egocentric for a second, because I think that's a very deep concept. So retinocentric, I take that as like a eye-centered coordinate. So maybe like the dumbbell's 30 degrees to the right in my visual field. So it's like my raw perception. But egocentric, I would assume, is maybe like body-centered coordinates, where it's like the brain is converting that raw data to arm position, shoulder angle, like reach distance, and then I'm thinking like I need to rotate my shoulder and extend my arm this way in order to pick it up.
Yes, I think that's right, Enzo. But I think it like the word of the choice of the word ego is very interesting because it seems to imply also a concept of will, right? Because like when I think of my ego, I'm also thinking of like,
Self-awareness.
why do I need to do that? Yeah, self-awareness. I need to do this, right? I like there's a concept of I need to get this task done as well. That's represented in that framework. Okay, if we look at table 2, now they go into specifics on the different brain areas activated during S states. And again, we don't have to go through the data with a fine-tooth comb because it's not like we're trying to distinguish, like in a paper on motor units, like how to best bias the lats. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to figure out how to bias certain areas of the brain here. All we're looking for is like a general trend that is showing like, hey, important areas of the brain that are involved with motor learning are activated during the imagined and intended actions. And some of those overlap with the execution. Some of those don't even. But if, like I was saying before, right, if we can expand the surface area of one circle, we're expanding the surface area of the middle. So if there are parts of the brain that we can access during the imagined instead of the execution that also contribute to motor learning, that's a unique benefit to visualization. Even on exercises that it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of coordination involved, you're still training a part of your brain that is involved in learning that isn't involved in the execution. So it seems like also, Enzo, another parallel to physiology is that it seems like there's a voluntary activation deficit in the brain as well. Like I think you described
it's the
earlier
amount
as
of
RAM.
work capacity. Yeah, RAM, 100%, random access memory, the amount that it can juggle, the amount of possibilities and movements that it can juggle at once and compute at once.
Right. You know what the interesting thing is to me, Enzo? It's not just calculating the amount of different things that it has to juggle, but it also seems to obviously be taking into account the intensity of those things, right? So, like, but if I'm doing an action and I want to do that action really hard, does that mean that I need more information to be sent? Do I need to be juggling more? Does my brain need to be thinking harder in some way in order to do that? Like, why is it that it seems to have this voluntary activation deficit, even when something might be very simple? You know what I mean? Because that's what I'm picking up from the fact that the imagined actions are different from the actually like executed actions. Like there's parts of the brain that aren't activated in both. It's like, well, obviously, like with the execution of it, I actually have to do it. Why is it that if I'm doing something very simple, I can't just use all parts of my brain? You know what I mean? Just to a very small degree.
Absolutely.
That's something I'm not asking you like you should know, but that's something that I wonder.
I wonder, let's say I were going up to the machine and I were about to execute a set of chest press. If I were thinking consciously about aggressively just rocketing that out of the hole, how would that impact the way that my brain is mapping the whole situation, in your opinion?
So that's interesting to me, and I see why you're asking that question, because immediately the way that the framework I'm putting this in is, would it make the movement more or less efficient? And I think that would depend on the weight itself. I think that the amount of explosiveness that you should be moving it with in order to optimize the accuracy, I guess, of your brain estimating the task is it should be literally just accurate to what the weight is going to feel like. Meaning if I'm moving a 50% weight as fast as I can, I should be trying to move it explosively like it's a 50% weight. However, if it's 100% weight and I'm thinking about it like it's a 50% weight, is my brain actually going to be optimized to anticipate the task fully? And And I don't think so. I think there's a reason why when we take the bar out the rack and we go, that feels heavy as shit. I think there's a reason why the nervous system is telling us that feels heavy as shit. So, a lot of people talk about, imagining moving the bar like it's 50% instead of 100% and that increasing strength. I think I don't think that's valueless. I don't think that's wrong. I just think that the explanation for why that works involves more of a removing inhibitions, like we were talking about before, removing the inhibitions that are associated with the anticipation. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because part of that anticipation is advantageous. It's adaptive. We need that anticipation. So it's about trying to get that anticipation while also trying to remove some of those inhibitions. But I don't think that involves consciously trying to think about moving the weight explosively. And I don't think that most powerlifters, at the elite level, when they're benching, I don't think that they're thinking about that. I think they're just thinking about executing, or they might just be thinking about nothing at all. I think most of the time they're thinking about nothing at all.
Right, but like you said in the last episode, since we're mainly communicating with bodybuilders, in the sport of bodybuilding, there is no competition. So there really isn't an instance where you would need to maximally move the most load possible with the greatest amount of explosive power. You just want to target an amount of tension to a specific muscle. That's really all we're trying to do with hypertrophy training. So I think that this holds a much bigger issue in situations like the cuck fantasy, which we love to talk about. Like if you are doing your set of bench and you are actively thinking about something that is not the way that you're executing your set, I can't imagine how that could be conducive. I can't imagine how that could be conducive to extra recruitment, extra tension applied to the tissue you're trying to target. The task should be the only thing on your mind. And if you're thinking about what your girl's doing when she's out with her friends, what relevance does that have to your form? And how big of an impact do you think that will have, in your opinion, to their performance?
Right. So that's another good point to bring up, Enzo, because there's also a difference. So you kind of said 2 points there, and I'm going to address both of those because I think they're both really good. The first point that you said was that there is a distinction between performance and training. As bodybuilders, we're not concerned with performance in the proper sense. We're not concerned with performance at all. At all. No one cares as a bodybuilder what their best bench on the best day, where everything's on point. You got the ammonia, you got all of this. No one cares about that. That will literally never make an effect on your bodybuilding progress ever, unless you let it.
At the very least, you should not care. And if you do care, you should not be bodybuilding.
That's Enzo's take. I'm not going to disagree with it. I'm not going to pretend like it's my own, but I think it's cool. I'll let it rock. So when we're trying to build muscle, we're also trying to recruit more motor units, right? When we're training, what are we training to do? We're training to get tension on the motor units that we're training, but we're also trying to train our nervous system to recruit motor units through the act of trying as hard as we can, right? But like you said, if we have a task-oriented mindset where we're thinking about how to get the weight up, then we will be maximizing motor unit recruitment in order to do so. But we're going to be maximizing the wrong motor units, right? We're not going to be targeting the muscle and just directing all that tension to that muscle. And so that leads us to the second point that you made, which is that anything that you're thinking about while you're in the process of learning something that is not the actual thing that you're trying to accomplish will not teach you that thing very efficiently. And this is the principle of specificity. If I want to learn something, I need to be doing that thing exactly. And as we just discussed in this paper, doing something exactly also includes visualizing it exactly. It's inherent in it.
It is inherent in it. You have to visualize something properly in order to maximize the doing part of it. So that means that in the process of training, we're not just training our muscles, we're training our nervous system, we're also training our brain. So in order to do that, we need to be focused on things that are improving that outcome. I was going to bring up something earlier, Enzo, about like, thinking about producing a max output. I was going to bring up an athletic example as well. There are so many people who are elite athletes. I've seen them, I've coached them, and we're practicing their vertical jump. And they're so practiced at the vertical jump, their movement is so second nature that now thinking about outputting more, even that is a distraction. Think about that. Even the thought of trying to output more consciously becomes a distraction. So there becomes a point where them focusing more mental RAM on producing output actually becomes counterproductive. And now what they need to focus on is relaxing and lowering inhibitions, lowering antagonist recruitment so that they can just release that power expression and that coordination that they've already built in. But that's still the principle of specificity. If they don't focus on relaxing those muscles, they won't do it. Everything goes back to understanding task specificity. And that's what we're trying to, I think the point we're trying to drive home with visualization and why it's so important to your bodybuilding goals. I'm not saying that every time before you go into a set, visualize yourself doing a bicep curl and it's automatically going to increase your motor unit by 10%. I don't think either of us are saying that. What we're saying is that in order to have the quickest path to refining your execution time in the context of bodybuilding. Wait, can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
My headphones did a thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So in order to maximize your learning, in order to get from point A to point B, where you're maximally learned in all of your exercises and you know exactly how to direct the tension into the target tissue, in order to get to that point the fastest, you are best spending all of your mental energy through your sets focused on that, in between your sets focused on that, and even outside of the gym thinking about those things, imagining those things, because that is part of the learning process. Enzo is going to just show you guys on the screen the screenshot of the table. So just pause the video right here if you want to look at all of the different parts of the brain that are used in the execution versus the intended versus the imagined versus the observed actions versus the observed objects. And then you can go ahead and go look through those parts of the brain yourself, and you will just literally, I just encourage you guys to type in, like, let's say middle frontal gyrus into PubMed and with the or into Google Scholar with also the key search terms motor learning, and see what pops up. See how these different areas of the brain are involved in motor learning, and that might help you see the potential of training all of these things independently, just like you would isolate a joint action.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'll put that up there.
Yeah.
So are we going to go over, we're going to skip brain lesions, I assume, because I don't think that really matters.
For sure. Because that's just, so, and the reason why brain lesions is in the paper, but we're not going to talk about it, is brain lesions part is important, but like anytime you guys see a study and they're talking about like making lesions to some part of like the thing they're testing, they're trying to test the negative. They're trying to test the alternative to their hypothesis to strengthen the conclusion that they're coming to. So what they're saying is like, okay, like let's say I want to say that the Achilles is important in jumping or like doing dorsiflexion. Well, one of the ways that I would prove that it's important is I would cut out the Achilles and say, okay, no more Achilles, can you still do dorsiflexion? And if you can't do dorsiflexion with no Achilles, pretty damn strong argument that the Achilles does dorsiflexion. So that's why they're doing the brain lesion stuff. It's to figure out, okay, if we get rid of this part of the brain, can this still happen? No, pretty damn good, compelling evidence. So again, that's a part that I think the audience can read themselves now that we just kind of explained that briefly.
I do want to talk about psychotic states, though, because I do think that's interesting, at least philosophically, and I do think it has a couple of implications as far as like movement and spatial awareness. So I'll read that if you don't mind. The simulation theory has been recently used as a possible framework for integrating social cognition to the neural substrate and for understanding the profound alterations of social behavior expressed by psychotic patients. When two agents socially interact with one another, representations are activated in their respective brains. Each agent generates representations for his own overt or covert actions and simultaneously simulates actions he observes from the other agent. In normal conditions, the existence of non-overlapping parts in the respectively activated networks allows each agent to discriminate what belongs to him from what belongs to the other. This process would thus be the basis for correctly attributing a representation or the corresponding action to the proper agent, or, in other words, for answering the question of who is the author of an action. This conception allows making hypotheses about the nature of the dysfunction responsible for misattribution of actions by schizophrenic patients. Changes in the pattern of cortical connectivity could alter the shape of networks corresponding to different representations or the relative intensity of activation in the areas composing these networks. In verbal hallucinations, for example, activity in primary temporal cortex is abnormally increased, which makes the patient feel that his voices originate from outside. Similarly, in delusion of influence, posterior parietal activation is abnormally high, hence the experience of alien control. Prefrontal cortex is one of the possible origins of this perturbed activation during S states in psychotic patients. So I think this is one of the deepest parts of the entire paper. Personally, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think that it takes a simulation theory and extends it from movement, imagery, and observation into identity, agency, and social reality itself. At this point, the paper is like begging us to add the question, like, how does the brain know which thoughts and actions belong to you versus somebody else? How do we distinguish the self from the exterior? And is there really just the dichotomy between us and our surroundings? I mean, your brain is constantly running these simulations.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. Continue.
What were you saying?
That's what I was going to say. Continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, your brain is constantly running me simulations and you simulations at the same time, but it's not really just me and you. You is just the entire outside world, and we make distinctions upon that. We make distinguishments upon that, and like normally these simulations partially overlap, but also remain partially distinct, and that allows us to attribute agency to things. Like I said this, you said that, I moved, but it's like, who is the real author of an action? And I feel like the paper is arguing that the sense of self may emerge from like just correctly tagging simulations as belonging to me.
So what do you think this says about like projection?
What do you mean by projection? Like in an emotional sense? Like in a social sense?
Like when I project my intentions onto somebody else, or like when I project my own stupidity onto someone else, and then I treat them as if they're the ones that are stupid, or if I like project my insecurities onto somebody and I pretend that they're the one that's insecure about this thing that I keep bringing up, something like that. What do you think is going on when somebody is projecting in the brain? Like, let's say you're accusing me of projecting right now. What are you saying is going on in my brain according to, you know, what's going on, what this paper is telling us? And the reason why I asked it in the open-ended way that I did before was because you're allowed to say that it has nothing to do with anything and it's irrelevant, or that it's not interesting to you. Like, you're allowed to say that. That's why I wanted to ask it in that way.
I think that as far as projection is concerned, the way I see it, it seems like the outside world comes to us in a package. It seems like we distinguish it after receiving it. We break down the pound once we've received it, it seems like. No? Like we receive the outside world as one big stimulus. We separate after the fact. So I would assume any type of accusation has to come from within in order for us to recognize it. So like I think projection is difficult to tackle because I feel that's not the cause.
Right.
The beginning is just any recognition of any type of behavior. Any criticism of that has to be a recognition of that behavior within yourself. Maybe that works the same way with movement. Yeah.
Because if I was like, let's say, because something that all human beings, for example, are familiar with, like, and we can recognize this in literally every animal, is they have like bodies that are connected to stuff. And that those things, we could consider them limbs, whatever. Like most things have limbs, right? Whatever. We call tree limbs limbs, right? Anything that we can relate to the concept of our arm or our leg, we can relate that in our head and we can imagine how it works. And we'll call it by how we know it works, a limb. Doesn't matter if it's literally like the same limb as us. If it does the function of that limb based off of what we see and recognize what we do, we call it that, right? But let's say like there's this like alien from outer space who has some sort of body part where he can like let's say he has a cup floating around his head constantly, right? And that's just a part of his body and it's connected by something and we don't see it. There's no way for us to imagine how it would feel for him to be moving that cup around. There's no way for us to know if it would hurt if we knocked him in the cup. You know what I mean? Because there's literally nothing for us to latch on. We can't even define the concept.
There's also no way for us to know what's him.
Right. Exactly. No, there's no way to even, yeah, that's a great point. There's no way for us to know that that's a part of him because the way that we distinguish things is completely, we take in the sense, like we take in the sensory package, we relate it to ourself, we like, there's an overlap, and then we differentiate it from there.
We're literally in Plato's cave.
We are.
We are in Plato's cave.
I do. Yeah, I have an inkling of a point based off of that. I'm trying to complete it in my head because that's really interesting. If we are in Plato's cave, and all of the things that we're seeing is just like these reflections, and we refine them over time by seeing a billion of those and correcting. So, like, how do we know that it is a reflection? What are we comparing it to know that it's a reflection of someone or a shadow of someone?
Yeah, who's to say it's not like an input that's being distorted or something?
I see. Right. So it's like it could be, right? Like it could be, there's always a chance that like what we're feeling and seeing and all these things is like not correct. Right. Or like not objective, I should say.
It's like
it's being
back to
colored.
Descartes.
Right.
The above pattern of results on the mechanisms of covert action corresponds to the central stages of action organization, uncontaminated by the effects of execution. As such, it represents a possible framework for motor cognition. First, because all aspects of action appear to be involved during S states, it seems a logical consequence of this rehearsal of the corresponding brain structures, and specifically the motor structures, that the subsequent execution would be facilitated. The presence of activity in the motor system during S states would put the action representation in a true motor format, so that it would be regarded by the motor system as a real action. This facilitation would explain various forms of training and learning which occur during S states. In addition, imitation would be based on directly matching the observed action onto an internal simulation of that action. Second, activation of the motor cortex and of the descending motor pathway seems to fulfill several critical functions. First, this activation contributes to generating corollary signals that propagate upstream to parietal and premotor cortex. This mechanism would allow evaluation of the potential consequences of the future action for description of a control model which accounts for this function. It could also provide the subject with information for consciously monitoring his S states and realizing that he is the agent of this covert activity in spite of absence of overt behavior.
Like, this just goes back to what Enzo was saying. It's providing the subject with information for consciously monitoring his S states and realizing that he is the agent of his covert activity in spite of the absence of covert behavior. In other words, I am the one imagining myself grabbing the cup, even though I don't have the sensory feedback to tell me it's me and to relate it back to this egocentric model. That's so fucking cool.
Yeah. And I also think that first sentence of the conclusion is huge too. Covert action corresponds to the central stages of action organization, uncontaminated by the effects of execution. I think he's saying, when you imagine movement, observe movement, mentally rehearse movement, you're studying the pure organizational structure of action itself. without muscle fatigue getting in the way, sensory noise getting in the way, biomechanical variability getting in the way, any execution errors getting in the way. So it's like your covert actions reveal the brain's internal blueprint for movement. Thinking about movement and executing movement are fundamentally linked, as we've been hammering down this whole time. Okay. Anyway, the important thing that matters for our training here is that this paper is implying that movement quality depends heavily on the quality of internal simulation before you execute. So calmness is going to be integral for your execution because a calm nervous system is going to reduce noise, improve your prediction accuracy, stabilize your motor planning, and sharpen your corollary modeling. Focus is going to matter because focused attention is going to strengthen your relevant motor representations and improve the specificity of your simulation. Visualization itself matters because it rehearses the movement internally, primes your motor pathways, and refines your prediction of the exercise. This paper's final conclusion is basically that movement is beginning as simulation.
We need to reduce interferences. That happens with what you said, calmness. We need to increase intensity of the signal and specificity of the signal. That happens through focus, like you said. And then we need to increase, or we need to tell those signals where to go. And that's the rehearsal. So dampening restrictions, increasing intensity, directing that intensity. That's the order of things.
And for the love for fuck.
Bro, just say it confidently, bro. That's
Man.
funny as fuck.
I'm done. I'm done, bro. I'm done.
Beautiful. Fuck you guys. Why did I say that, bro? That's not even me. I love all of you
Done,
guys.
man.
Thank
We
for
gave you
fucking
enough.
watching.
I love you
Yeah.
all. Please think about yourself. Think about yourself as if you're in a movie cutscene when you're doing all of your sets. Imagine yourself like you're in an edit. Put your favorite black pill in the background. Just think about yourself. Get your girlfriend off the mind. She's probably having fun with her friends. It's girls' night out. Enjoy yourself. Think about yourself. Worry about yourself. Let's get these gains.
What else is there to say? What else is there to say?
Who wants to watch me swallow this microphone?